Between July and November of 2012, 3 men were killed by 67-year-old Salvatore Perrone in New York. When the police arrested him, they found a black duffel bag with a sawn-off .22 caliber rifle inside, with a flashlight taped around the barrel of the gun with duct tape, and pink rubber bands inside that bag. In court, he was very disruptive, and he initially tried to represent himself. He claimed that he didn't kill the first victim and that he was working with the CIA, who'd forced him at gunpoint to shoot one of the victims. He was diagnosed as having severe personality and delusional disorder. He was sentenced to 75 years to life. Because this is one of the little-known cases, or one of those cases that's not talked about a huge amount of a serial killer, I'm going to tell you all of the details of these specific crimes. I will do my best to remember to put timestamps in the description, just in case you do want to jump straight to the psychology in this case. Please keep in mind that all of the information that I've collected about this particular case was collected from various online sources, and information was cross-checked wherever possible. On the 6th of July 2012, Mohammed Gabelli, aged 65, was found dead in his clothing store. He'd been killed by a single shot to his neck. On the 2nd of August 2012, Isaac Kader, who was aged 69, was found dead in his clothing store. He was shot in the head and his throat had been slit. On the 16th of November 2012, 78-year-old Ramatola Vadiapur, I'm sorry if I've said that wrong, was found dead and he'd been shot in his face, chest and head. The bodies had been covered in clothing or other items from within the shops to conceal them to passers-by. But the suspect didn't remove the shell casings from the scene of any of these crimes. He didn't use a different weapon, and this allowed detectives to connect all of these 3 killings. The police had sent out a description and CCTV of a man that they wanted to question. Someone from the Bay Ridge pharmacy recognised the man as being 67-year-old Salvatore Perrone and rang the police. The police tracked him down and arrested him at his girlfriend's house and took him in for questioning. They found a black duffel bag at the property that matched the one in the CCTV. The bag had contained a sawn-off shotgun with a flashlight taped around the barrel and duct tape and pink rubber bands in the bag. In court, his girlfriend, who was 63-year-old Natasha Kurova, said that on the 16th of November 2012, she and Perrone had gone dancing in Beaconsfield at around 9:15 p.m. And this would have been about 2 hours after he'd killed somebody. She told the court, "He seemed the same. I don't see any change," and that was in a very thick Russian accent, describing Perrone's behaviour while they danced. He's a dancer, he's a talker, he was dancing, he was talking to people. She identified herself and Perrone on the CCTV with him carrying a black bag. Shirova confirmed that the bag was the same one that Perrone had kept at her place, which was behind the couch on the floor. She said that Perrone, her then boyfriend of 5 years, had accompanied her home after the club that evening and spent the next 4 days at her place before he was arrested. At the time of the murders, she claimed that the relationship was already unstable. She said it was up and down, up and down. And she said, he's upset, he's not upset. He didn't have as much money, he couldn't buy a bottle of wine. Once Perrone was arrested, he claimed that he was a CIA operative who was ordered to kill Jews by Arab men who paid him for his role in the murders. He claimed to be an Italian CIA agent working with the Palestinian section of the CIA, and that he watched while 2 different Middle Eastern men that he'd met at the Knights of Columbus had shot and killed the first 2 victims. In his police interview, he went on to say that one of the Middle Eastern men, identified in the court papers as Mr. C, had insulted his masculinity and had forced him at gunpoint to stab one of the victims. He claims that Mr. C once more told him to finish it while pointing a gun at him. And it was at this point that he takes the knife and he stabs the man in the neck at least twice. And when Perrone told them this information, the New York Police Department had sent in then 2 Italian-speaking detectives who were posing as Italian special detectives, posing as special agents from Rome, and sent in to praise Perrone's work and get him to start talking about the killings. Once Perrone had opened up, he told these pretend feds that he killed the shopkeepers, whom he knew through his work of selling clothing in the garment industry, because he was acting on orders from the Italian CIA, adding that he expected to be paid around $800,000 once he'd completed his mission. We know from financial records that Perrone was financially strapped after his clothing factory had closed, and he was then selling materials such as women's clothing and plastic garment covers to businesses in Brooklyn. According to the New York State Civil Court documents, he defaulted on mortgage loan payments to his home and he'd been sued as well. Perrone was a divorced father who had a history of drink driving. However, despite his financial difficulties, he still had a vision of creating his own clothing line. In 2007, Perrone registered a trademark for a line of clothes that would then carry the label Salvatore Perrone, and it wasn't clear whether there were any items actually manufactured or sold with that label on. There are different views when it comes to how those who knew him went on to describe him in court and in the various media outlets. Those who lived near him on Staten Island described him as both overly combative and oddly exuberant, and they described him as a man who might threaten to call the authorities over a minor dispute, or that he could sometimes be seen in the middle of the street singing. His home was in a very poor state of repair. Sharon Sullivan, a former neighbour, said, "It's looked haunted and unlivable in for about the past 20 years. The place had no windows where the windows should be. Entrances didn't seem visible." One of his neighbours, named Belle Elkonen, said that he lived, or Mr. Perrone appeared to live, in his own little bubble. A lawyer who'd represented him in one of his previous cases had said that he seemed like a very personable guy. He described him as being kind of like a middleman for a clothing supplier. He said that he would occasionally get the friendly holiday calls in the past, but more recently, Mr. Perrone appeared to, in his words, just fall off the map. John O'Rourke, 65, whose backyard overlooked Perrone's, called him a weird duck, and he described him as being just like Edgar Allan Poe, always dressed in black. He said, "Every time I see him, he was wearing all black." He said that the home, which was surrounded by an unfinished concrete wall, had been under construction for years, and that Perrone lived in the basement. Julia Mara, 21, who grew up opposite Perrone, said that he was always really loud and out in the street and yelling, and he'd be yelling and singing. Neighbours told authorities that Perrone wasn't the same after he'd split from his wife. He'd stopped the upkeep of his home that he shared with his ex then, and began displaying weird behaviour, according to neighbours, leading the neighbours to refer to Perrone as the son of Sal. Sammy Alrod, the owner of a clothing store, said, "I don't know him very well, but he was very friendly," he said of Perrone, "but if someone told me that he was a killer, I wouldn't believe it." One of the former employees of Perrone's, who'd worked at a clothing store during the 1980s, said that he was always a little strange, but you never thought that he was going to do anything like this. They said that he did weird things, such as double-checking himself all the time. They said that he would walk in and out of the door and open it and close it, and he would write a check out and then check it over and over 1,000 times. But that former employee insists that Perrone and his ex-wife were nice people. They said, I can't believe this, but like I said, he was very strange. Perrone used to collect his prescriptions from the New Edge pharmacy located across the street from the first killing, but he'd stopped going in sometime in February, recall the pharmacist. The pharmacist said of him that he was always very friendly, he was always dressed nicely and was always holding a big cigar. And he added that Perrone did have some strange tendencies. He said when he got his medication, he would sit down and examine it, tablet after tablet, each tablet checking it by itself, George said. He said that he would make jokes about it and that the two of them would laugh, but that everybody feels safer now that he's off the street. Perrone maintained his innocence throughout the whole trial, and that was despite the huge amount of evidence against him. After Perrone was found fit for trial, he made a bid to represent himself, but the judge denied that request to keep the courtroom from becoming a circus because of his frequent outbursts. But he still made lengthy complaints about various things such as not seeing the police reports and about his lawyer failing to adequately represent him or to get in touch with his daughter and his sister. He also claimed that information had been kept from him and that he was tortured at the police station when he was arrested. He claimed that the authorities wouldn't let him speak to his daughter or his sister. The prosecutor said that she communicated with the daughter and with the sister and that they didn't want to have any contact with Mr. Perrone. After a lot of back and forth in court, the judge then turned round to him and said, apparently your family members are not interested in coming into court or assisting you. Ken Jones was a lawyer who said that he represented Mr. Perrone for the arraignment only, said that from his conversations with the client, he does seem as though he could have some mental health issues. His affect is just a little different, he said, adding that on the other hand, he hadn't spent enough time with his client to make a determination regarding his psychological state. When Perrone was being questioned in court, he claimed that he'd been framed by a man named Michael Biller, who he said was an Iranian national who he'd done business with in the past, and given him the black duffel bag. It was him who'd given Perrone the black duffel bag, which contained the sawn-off rifle and the knife. Perrone went on to say in court, at least that's what he told me his name was. I know for sure that's not his real name. That's a fictitious name, he said in court. Perrone admitted that he'd purchased the gun, but he suggested that Biller had stolen it from him in 2010 when he was left alone in his apartment. On Sunday, November the 18th, Michael Biller came over to the apartment where he lived, Perrone said, and gave him the duffel bag. And Perrone said in court, and as we all know, there was a rifle in that duffel bag, he said, and he claimed he didn't open it at the time. Perrone did concede that he'd been caught on camera near the murder scene of Isaac Kadar with that black duffel bag. But he said that the bag was filled with clothes that he was trying to sell. I did own that duffel bag, he said. Of course I owned that black duffel bag. I owned maybe 4 or 5 identical black duffel bags. Perrone testified that on the 6th of July, the day that he allegedly killed his first victim, that was the Bay Ridge store owner Mohammed Gheli, that he was at a dinner party and was nowhere near the scene of the crime. I dealt with him, he said in court, when I had leftovers in my inventory, he said. We'd talk and we'd joke. We had a cordial relationship. I did see his son throughout the years grow up, and on occasion I met his wife. On the day of the final murder, Rafael Pichardo, who was a clothing manager, said that Perrone had came into his store on the day of the murder around closing time, but, in his words, skedaddled after noticing security cameras. He said, I felt uncomfortable. He said that Perrone had just stood there for 10 minutes, just looking up and completely ignoring everyone. People were approaching him, saying good morning, hello, and he didn't say anything. Pichardo told the court that he eventually asked Perrone what the F was wrong with you and what the F were you doing here. During the case, the judge had said, despite the overwhelming evidence that convicted this defendant, videos, DNA, fingerprints, telephone records, the defendant is still in denial. Perrone responded to that by saying, if I'm lying, hang me. And that was just before he was taken off to the holding cell. The psychiatric evaluation was conducted by 3 different doctors, and they concluded that Perrone suffered from severe personality and delusional disorder. They said his claims that he was working with the Palestinian section of the CIA were not the result of insanity. They suggested that the thought process reflects a grandiosity on his part that's more consistent with personality disorder rather than a mental disease or defect. Delusional disorder is a type of mental health condition in which a person can't tell what's real and what's imagined. There are many different types of this, including persecutory, jealous, and grandiose types. People with a grandiose type of delusional disorder have an overinflated sense of their own self-worth, their own power, their own knowledge, and their identity. They might believe that they have a very great talent, or they might have made an important discovery of some type. At this moment in time, we don't know what the motive was. We can only look at the possibilities based on his behaviour. First of all, Perrone was 67 at the time of the murders, and it is incredibly rare, but not impossible, for a person to become a serial killer at that age. As I said, though, it's improbable, but not impossible. Most serial killers kill their first victim when they're in their 20s or their 30s. And secondly, most serial killers have a preferred type of victim. And in this case, the preferred type of victim appears to be male store owners of a Middle Eastern descent. The victims of serial killers are generally or mostly not known to them. They might choose sex workers because they're the ones who are least likely to be reported missing. They might be homosexuals because of some deep-seated hatred that the killer has towards them. The victims could simply be in the wrong place at the wrong time, meaning that the killers would seek out places to offend rather than victims. However, Perrone knew at least one of his victims. Because of the work that he did selling fabrics in the area, he's likely to have known all of the victims. And this means that he could have been killing because of something that they did or said against him. Perrone could have had something against shopkeepers in general. It could be racially motivated, and it could be that he was targeting any shopkeepers selling similar items. But that leaves the question of why these men and not others? On the day of the final murder, he entered into a shop behaving oddly, but he left without killing anybody. Rafael Pichardo, who was the store manager, thinks it was because that he'd seen the CCTV cameras in the shop. We know that Perrone was in financial difficulty, so he could have committed any of those murders simply to get money. However, nothing was taken from 2 of the stores, at least that we know of. During the trial, Perrone claimed that he was working with the CIA, and the men were killed because of his involvement with this. He'd been diagnosed as having delusional disorder by 3 different doctors. Therefore, it's quite likely that he believes that he was acting with the CIA. If he had delusions of them telling him that these men had to be killed and that they would pay him for doing that, he could well have acted on it. Those who knew Perrone from his Staten Island home said that he was in his own little bubble. He was also described as being a bit weird. Julia Mara, who grew up opposite Perrone, said that he would always be outside and yelling and shouting, yelling, singing in the street. One of his former employees said that he did weird things, such as double-checking himself all the time. He'd walk in and walk out of the door, open it and close it a few times. The employee also said that he would write a check out and that he would double-check that 1,000 times. The pharmacist who supplied his prescriptions said that when he got his medication, he'd sit down and examine each tablet by itself. These behaviours could indicate an element of obsessive-compulsive disorder. However, they could also be a part of his delusional tendencies. If, for example, he believed that someone was trying to hurt him or kill him, he could be checking for his own safety. Some who knew him insisted that although he was a little strange, he was a nice guy. His girlfriend at the time said that he was up and then down, meaning that he was likely to have extreme mood swings. He didn't appear to live a life that was full of delusion. It seemed as though they came and went, these delusions would come and go, and this may account for the varying descriptions of him as well. Without any further information available on Salvatore Perrone, there isn't really much more that I can say about this case, but I do hope that you've enjoyed hearing about it and of my analysis of that. More importantly, I do hope that you've learned something new from it. Thanks so much for watching then. See you soon. Bye for now.